My name is Paula. I'm working with Biodiversity for a Livable Climate, and I am here today because I had the honor to introduce Mel King to you. And some of you, if you've lived in Boston a long time, may know about Mel's incredibly long and important history here and the work that he's done, but some of you may not, so I'm going to go back a little bit in time. One of the earliest organizations that Mel started, which was back in the early 60s, was called CAUSE, an acronym for Community Assembly of a United South End. The South End being the base of Mel's home and work. And I'm mentioning the name of the group because it sort of astounded me looking at it that out of the 5 words in that sentence, 3 of them all really mean community. Community, Assembly, United. And Mel's work has been about looking at people as groups, looking at communities, and helping people see how they can take some control over their lives and impact the kinds of developments that go on in their communities. And he's done this a number of times. The most notable that you might remember would be Tent City, which is now a development that has a lot of affordable housing in it that would not have been built if it hadn't been for the efforts of a lot of people camping out there. It was supposed to be, by the city's intention, a parking lot, but now it is housing and also includes a computer technology center for residents of Tent City. So, from 1973 to 1982, Mel was a state legislator from the 9th Suffolk District. And while he was in the legislature, that was the first time I certainly became aware of him. I heard him on the radio talking about the Farmland Preservation Act, which he was promoting, probably sponsoring, in the state legislature. And prior to that, he had also pushed into legislation an urban farming initiative. During that time, just so that you understand the range of his work, Mel also got the state legislature to divest from South Africa, to take the pension fund for the state, and divest pension monies from any businesses that were working with South Africa, doing business with South Africa. And for those of you who don't remember it, it was a pretty remarkable moment in Boston's history. But when Nelson Mandela was released from Robben Prison, I believe the first place he came was to Boston. And Mel introduced him at the Hatch Shell to the Boston audience. So this is not, Mel's significance goes beyond Boston. He is a much larger figure than that. He's also, he was the founder of the Rainbow Coalition, which later merged with the Green Rainbow Party and became, with the Green Coalition and became the Green Rainbow Party. He supported Ralph Nader in his presidential bid. During all this time, he was also an adjunct professor of urban studies and planning at MIT and founded the Community Fellows program there, which brings people with skills in as interns, but sends them back into the community to develop their skills right there. I'm not saying that very well. Perhaps Mel can explain it better, but that program is now called the Collab Mel King at MIT Urban Studies. He, in 2013, founded the Urban Farming Institute, and in 2013, the Urban Farming Institute, at their first conference, gave Mel a Urban Farming Lifetime Achievement Award for his commitment to agriculture and his visionary work for rural and urban farming. And I think that the last thing that I'll mention is 2003, he started a group called the New Majority, bringing together, uniting communities of color so that Black, Hispanic, Asian American, and Native American communities would work together around specific issues. So this is somebody who understands the importance of the land, the importance of the ecosystem, and the importance of community and of communities coming together. And really, never has that been more important than right now. So I give you Mel King.
Can you hear me? Yes. Way up there? Yep. Thank you. I start with that because the other day I did a little workshop at UMass Boston where the discussion was on management. And one of the thoughts I had was to start it by talking about the importance of listening. A friend from way back, Father John Harmon, in an article called The Cycle of Silence, wrote, "To really listen means a willingness to change." And that, for me, is very important because what it does is affirms the humanity of the person or persons you are listening to. And out of that, part of some of the work in organizing was to try to learn how to plan without a plan. And not to go in with a plan already, because that means you don't listen. So what's important then is to let the folks that you're working with talk about what their needs are and what's in their interest. And starting with that, when I ran for state rep and was going out talking to groups, there was a group up around where Roxbury Community College is, and a group in Jamaica Plain, mostly folks who'd come from Puerto Rico. And in the discussion, they said, well, if you get elected, can you see to it that some of this vacant land can be turned over for community farming and gardens? And obviously said yes, because the highway that was supposed to be built on at I-95, we had stopped. And so the land was vacant, and the question of what was going to happen. Well, as you know, one of the things that did take place was the Orange Line got located there and other things. But the important thing is that the first piece of legislation and resources that I was able to get out of the legislature was money to clear some of that land and put some fence around it so that the folks could begin to use it to grow food. And I start with that because the question of listening. Because one time, you know, you go in as a candidate and you're going to talk about what you're going to do. And most times you don't get to do it. But if you come in and you do what the people think is in their interest, then as you go through, when it came time to get the bill before the legislature to get the resources, the people were there because they understood that they were jointly working on something that was in their interest. And I'd like to start with that because I think as we talk about what we're going to do with the land and urban farming, I think it's important to know what the people in those areas are interested in and thinking about so that you have kind of a collaborative process around how to make things happen. Now let me back up from there to say in some way how I got to be interested in agriculture and community gardening, farming. As a youngster growing up in the South End, my mother used to send us out to pick up the horse manure because she was planting some little food, but mostly for her flowers and things. And it was the first lesson in, you know, the whole natural process in terms of the planting, etc. Although we had serious problems, you know, picking up the manure and bringing it to the house. But nonetheless, it was an example of using the ecosystem as it existed to grow things. Then there was the war, and the call came for community gardens for people to grow food for themselves because they needed some of the food for the military, etc. And one of the wonderful sights was to see the adults on our street and blocks. And you just need to know that I grew up in a neighborhood where there were 32 different racial, ethnic, cultural groups. And so to watch the adults from different backgrounds, there was a corner where there was a vacant lot. They all got there. They started to plant and grow foods. And so it was just wonderful as a child to see how they were coming together and see what kinds of things they grew. Well, my next bit came when I went to camp run by Goodwill up in South Athol, Mass. And every one of us was given a plot for growing. And so every day we went out, we put in at least an hour for these 6 weeks in the summer, planting, growing, watering, weeding, whatever was necessary. 9, 10, 11 years of age, so did all those years. And then we left at the end of the summer, and then we got a call around Thanksgiving to come to the church, and we went in, and there were bags of vegetables that supposedly we had grown. Right? Now, I knew that we hadn't planted potatoes, but we had, carrots, onions. There are a number of things. But we got a big bag and had all these foods, including some squash, okay? And, but we took them home and felt like we had made some big-time contribution. Now, and obviously I learned later that they just stacked the stuff with stuff that came from the larger farm that was out there. But walking in the house with it, you couldn't tell me anything about what I had accomplished. And part of that, for me, is being involved in a way that you're creative. You watch something grow, and you can see the results of the work you are doing. So when the folks asked about running, when I was running, it was really a slam dunk. The other part of it is that one of the first talks that I gave in the legislature around that bill had to do with getting the land, again, turned over to the folks. But at the same time, there was this issue of the waterfront. And I had been to Barbados where my folks were from and saw this issue of the hotels and businesses coming down and wanting to take control of the beachfronts in a way that the people who lived there couldn't have access. But they did stop that kind of thing. And so when a bill came before the legislature, I got up and I spoke and said, no, we can't let that happen. Well, the person who was chair of the Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources came over to me after and he said, wouldn't you like to join the committee? I said, wow. I got on the committee because now I'm on the committee that is going to make some decisions about the land, which I thought was very, very important. So by talking about saving one aspect, it got me into the committee, and it was interesting because some of the folks in the legislature would say, well, why are you on that committee? I said, it's natural resources, agriculture. I like to eat good, and if you're on that committee, you can do things to facilitate that. Okay, so I get on the committee, and I remember, again, what the folks asked if I was to get elected. And so one of the first pieces of legislation I filed was called the Massachusetts Farm and Gardening Act, which meant that at those days, and prior to this, the different institutions, mental health, some of the corrections places, used to have food grown on their property. And for some reason, they stopped, and then when they stopped having the mental health institutions and wanted to bring people in closer to their communities into smaller approaches, they had the land laying there. And so part of the bill that I filed was that that land could be turned over to people to grow food. And that was the first part of the Massachusetts Farm and Gardening Act. And as a result, we were also able to push the cities to get people access to some of the land that was laying bare in their cities. And one of the things that happened is there was a young man, Michael Scully, who was at UMass, and when he saw the legislative ideas, he asked if he could be an aide. Obviously, yes. And best move I made in the legislature, because one of the things he said was, okay, here's what we do. We show the reps where the land is that their people can have access to. We would show them where they can get seeds and the kind of things to share with their constituents. And then when we did that, we encouraged them to publish it in their local newspapers, and they did, and they were getting great responses from their constituents. So I have to tell you, almost anything I put before the legislature that had something to do with gardening, food, or whatnot, I didn't have to worry because we had already built the relationship with folks in a way that they knew that the things that we were promoting around food and community gardens, around the farmers markets, etc., had gotten them some support because we put the press release in their hands that they sent out to their constituents, which made them look big time with their constituents. And as a matter of fact, a couple of times the speaker, when somebody would come in asking questions about it, he would send them to see me. Now, here I am. I said I'm from the concrete and asphalt and bricks, and I'm some kind of an expert, supposedly, on farming and agriculture. Well, took advantage of that and pushed a couple of things. We, as I said, the Farmland Preservation Act, which meant that people had to offer the land to the state first before offering it elsewhere. State bought up a lot of the land, and it is still in farming conditions as we speak. The other things that we did was to develop a small farm institute out in the western part of the state, which I think is still in existence. So that's a piece of the work that I tried to put together. Oh, one of my fun pieces was called the Fruition Bill. What it meant was that the state would provide fruit trees, nut trees, berry bushes on nonprofit owned land or public land, and if you came, you could put in the claim to get that happen. And one day I was going to a conference with the Mashpee Indian tribe and drove up, and what was happening, they were planting some nut trees, berry bushes from that legislation. Now, I can't tell you how high I got after seeing firsthand that legislation in their hands, and they were planting the things that they got from the Department of Agriculture. Well, when we went in, because every time you got a bill passed, the governor had to sign it, and the governor at that time was King, no relation, and so we went in, and he picked it up and looked at it, and he said, "What the," I'm not going to use the word he used, "is this?" And I said, "It's my Johnny Appleseed bill." Anyhow, he signed it, and Greg Watson, who got to be the head, we got him the job, and he did incredible stuff in terms of getting people interested into farming, agriculture, etc. So that's actually how we got here. One other thing in terms of the topsoil, because in Boston, because of lead that was in the buildings, and sometimes when they knocked the buildings down, the lead had seeped in, etc. And so we had to take it out. And then what we were going to replace it with, it turned out that the MDC, as it was at this time, had lots of topsoil out in Marlboro. And so we contacted first the National Guard, and then we contacted the Association of Contractors, and who brought their big trucks in. National Guard loaded them, and they brought them into the city so we could replenish the soil. And at that time, my friend Dick Gregory was running across country with his health ideas. I contacted him, says, "You're going to be in Massachusetts soon. Would you lead this group of trucks into the city?" He said he'd run the last 26 miles, which is the marathon, in front, and he came running into the city in front of all these trucks. We had a great event right here in the South End. So every time I see him, I remind him of that activity. So I said, how do we get here? Some of those are the things that got me to be here, but underneath of it, a recognition that of the importance of food production in the state, and stopping some of the dependency and making sure that we could get the kind of quality of food that was important. So we worked on that, and recently, and I just want to correct something about the Urban Farming Institute. I did not start it. I'm a board member of it, started by Glenn Lloyd and some folks who put together this program and asked if I would be part of it. Of course, and what we have done for the last 3 years is, well, first there was a conference in Worcester for 2 years, and this year 400 people showed up to this conference on urban farming that was held there. And then we trained 8 folks in 13, another 8 in 14 to be urban farmers. I think we have 12 folks now that are learning to be urban farmers. Our task is to make sure that we can get the land for them to use to grow food, so that the skills that they have developed will work out both ways for them and for the people there. We've been doing some of the training at the Sportsman's Tennis Club. They have an incredible garden back there, and some of the products are put into the farmers markets in the local community. So it's kind of got the cycle, but we have to try and get them the land. We just took over a plot of land in Roxbury on Harold Street, and we're going to be working on that. The idea is, how do we get more of the land that's out there? I've spoken with the Department of Transportation about all the vacant land along the highways. And there are 2 options, I believe, that we need to think about. One is energy, which fits in with the issues of reducing some of the carbon stuff by getting solar panels and things placed along the highways so that we can take advantage of that. And the other is see what, since there is some of the vacant land that's adjacent to the highways, to see if we can begin to get them to take over. I thought we had some interest, but Mr. Davey has moved over to the Olympics part, so I don't have anything yet going with whoever has taken his place with the Department of highways so that we can talk to them about getting some of that land. And every one of us, I'm sure, is near some land that is owned by the state, that's just sitting there, and that I think ought to make a bid to try and get that and begin to turn it into some kind of food production or some way of using it to reduce the amount of carbon, et cetera, that is in the air over there. So it would be, I think, a great project for folks to take a look at, see where it is, how much of it's out there. I've looked at some, can't remember where, and it's a nice green plot. I said, well, hey, I'll bet they could grow some, tomatoes, onions, or whatever on that, and even some flowers, so which can be marketed for that. So let me just add one thing, and that is that I don't know if you are familiar with Jane Hersey and an organization that she has developed called City Sprouts. Yeah. Have you heard of it? Okay, well, if your community and the schools in your community aren't working with the children to grow food and learning about this, then, well, I know you got other reasons for being here, but I think that that would be the most significant thing that you could do, is to go back into your communities, see what kind of open space there is, and get the children involved in planting, growing, etc. And you will see the kind of energy and interest that they will put in as a result of watching things grow. Okay, so I'd say that if you were going to try to take anything from me today, I would want it to be that you make a commitment to see to it that every schoolyard around you has a way for the children to learn to grow food. They will have an incredible appreciation for the impact it will have on their life, but their role in providing food and working on the issues of energy in ways that you'll see them smiling as they about it. So I'd stop there, and we would. Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask Mel? Or are we?
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So we're raising meadows because they're good for biodiversity, for wildlife habitat. And the next thing is vegetable. This is our part is probably going through the whole, you go through the whole city and put meadows, pollinator patches next to every garden to bring in butterflies and bees.
Mm-hmm. Share the model with folks. You get me? Share your model with folks.
Yes.
Now that's what's most important, okay? You get a good idea, a good model, share it. Write about it. The little stories in the newspaper, whatever. Tweet it, etc. Send it with some photos because other people will pick up on it.
Any other questions? Okay.
You don't have to.
Mel, this is a hit back into history. Back in the days of bug, there was a short time when there was a permaculture committee for bug. And one of the things that we talked about in the permaculture committee was native plants, native food-bearing plants to be that could be planted with low maintenance across by highways, right? And we took notes, and I believe all the notes of bug are over at UMass Boston now. And within those notes should be a list of native food-bearing plants that we thought were good candidates for this kind of stuff. I think if we go back to the permaculture community, which has grown up so much since we were doing that in the 1970s, we could start talking about these things in a different way and put a new fruition program in place, which could be quite interesting. You know, as you know, we go back a long time, and it's interesting to see the stuff that we were working on in the 70s, we're still working on now, but we know so much more.
We do. No, you're right.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Mel. It's 5 o'clock.
Seriously?
There's a question up there.
I disappeared when I stood up at the mic. Every time I stand up at the mic, I disappear. I'm just sharing. He said share your idea. In Dorchester right now, we have a food forest being developed with edible landscape, and it's on an urban wild. And we have 2 urban wilds that we already developed one. One is called Geneva Cliffs. And we took things that were dumped there, worked with the city, and got some paths built, some benches made out of old discarded things from public works that were, and so you can go up there, and I call it the woods in the neighborhood. And so that's Geneva Cliffs, that's on Geneva Ave. We also had another urban wild, and it was just some space that was not really developable, and working with the Fairmount, my name is Mela Miles, and I work for the Greater Four Corners Action Coalition, and working with the Fairmount Greenway Task Force, we are putting together a food forest with fruit trees. I don't know if it used a fruition bill, but it's fruit, nuts, and berry bushes. And we also have a group coming in called the Sustainability Guild that is right next to that urban food forest. And we also have we have an urban farm in Four Corners that's working with the Urban Farm Institute. And we've also been, with Greater Four Corners Action Coalition, we took some court-involved youth and said, well, if you're gonna put an urban commercial farm on an old vacant lot in Dorchester in the middle of our community, then let's get some students over there. So the first summer that they started growing, we brought some young men over there, and they went and took the urban farm training, and they were out there growing food. And you know, I have a picture of this guy with this huge cucumber that they grew. And then last summer we took our ABCD interns and we brought them over and taught them all about the soil, and they were pulling up weeds and things. So these are the kind of things that are actually happening. They may not be out in the news, and we have a host of community gardens that are going on, and we're starting a Green Dreams team. So there's a lot of things that are happening right now in Boston. It's really exciting, you know, so you don't have to go all the way to Holyoke, even though, you know, we can partner up and share, you know, some of the things that, and learn from one another and come to these type of conferences and share what's going on and then build off of that. One of the other things that was instrumental in getting the urban farms in was Article 89, which changed the zoning so that people could get urban farms in, but people didn't want goats and chickens because they thought they smelled bad and didn't want them living next door. But we're looking at maybe a chicken and rabbit kind of thing. So I just wanted to share that. It's not a question. Mr. King and I talk all the time. My name is Mella. His name is Mel. We kind of like, you know. So thank you. It wasn't really a question.
If I can add something to that.
Thank you so much, Mella, and thank you, Mel, for coming here today and sharing all that history with us.
Well, thank you for doing it, because this is what we need to just keep on moving, you know, sharing, moving. We can turn it around.
Yes, I think we can. I think we can. And Mella, the kinds of things that you were talking about, stuff is sprouting up, to coin a phrase, all over. And I do this work all the time, and there's always something new, somebody new. It could be down the block, it could be on the other side of the world. So we are in a very exciting time. It's perilous on the one hand and promising on the other. Apropos of giving technology another try. Hey, about that. We have some meetups coming up and events that you may be interested in. You'll get an email if you're signed up, which I assume you are, for today's conference. We'll be sending around announcements. In particular, I want to encourage you to stay tuned for our fall conference at Tufts on October 16th through 18th called Restoring Water Cycles to Reverse Global Warming. As it turns out, we are learning, the evidence is mounting, that even with carbon dioxide levels, what they are in the atmosphere, we can do a great deal to cool the biosphere by restoring water cycles, which also means restoring land and communities and food production. So we are headed in that direction. It's inexpensive, it's beautiful, and thank you all so much for coming today. We're moving forward.